idea here. So what we're going to do is our panel today is myself, Pastor Bob, and Lisa, and Kate Kieran, who's one of our chairs, along with Lisa, of the All Means All committee that works on matters of justice and inclusion in our church. I'm going to offer a few highlights of what has happened at General Conference, more just to give you the information, and then I'm going to turn it over to our others to speak about how they view and interpret these events, and then we'll open the floor for anybody's questions. So just give us a few moments to get the stage set. Just a comment that we are recording just the opening section today. Once we're done with our comments, we'll turn the recording off so you don't feel like you're being recorded as you ask questions and make statements. Okay, so just a couple of quick comments about the dynamics that were at play around this General Conference. One story that was circulating the news a lot is that we had 1/3 of our African delegation was absent, and due primarily to visa issues. There were concerns that the UMC didn't do enough to help them navigate those visa issues, but that was put to bed, and later on they said they did do enough. That was a story. There was resistance from the GMC operatives, as they were referred to, or the Global Methodist Church. These were people who were elected some time ago, but I don't totally understand all the ins and outs, but for some reason, even though they're affiliated with the GMC, they could still be there and have a vote. It was a small group of about 20 of them. But they were really there trying to undermine what was happening at General Conference. They wanted more churches to leave and join their movement. They haven't had enough churches join them. That's one of their objectives. They especially wanted to go after Africa and convince them to leave and come over to their side. And they wanted to make one final stand against LGBTQ, removing the anti-inclusion language. A key moment was that almost one of their key members was voted in as a chair of a key legislative committee. It didn't happen because somebody Googled him at the last second, but that was a harrowing moment. So there was also very limited time on the plenary floor for discussion. There was still a lot of petitions, and so there was a lot of pressure. They got a lot done, but that was a complicated dynamic to navigate. So on to some of the key things that happened. Of course, was the removal of the anti-LGBTQ language from the discipline, and I want to break that down just a little bit more, and then you can ask questions. We can go into more depth if you like. There's really kind of two broad sections where the changes were made. One was to the social principles of the Book of Discipline. This set our stance on a wide range of social issues as United Methodists. So for several decades, there's been this language. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teachings. That has been removed from the social principles. Exactly. That's wonderful news. Then in 2019, we had a special session of General Conference, and during that time, something called the Traditionalist Plan was passed, and that put in several restrictions and consequences for clergy who were ordained or tried to officiate at an LGBTQ wedding, and many other restrictions as well. So those restrictions were, and consequences, those were all erased, and they're gone. There were many that were removed there. So in particular, now we can freely ordain LGBTQ individuals. Weddings can occur, we can officiate at as clergy, and churches can be used for those weddings. And then we passed 2 amendments to the Constitution that refer to inclusivity. It's important to note, whenever you amend the Constitution, if it passes the plenary floor, as these did, and a few others we'll mention, they then have to be ratified by all of the annual conferences and what are called the central conferences throughout the connection of United Methodism. So there's 7 central conferences that are found throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa and the Philippines. Many of them tend to be more conservative than the U.S. by a significant margin in some cases. So that can make it challenging. But nevertheless, these amendments passed. All right, so the first one is the United Methodist Church commits to confronting and eliminating all forms of racism, racial inequality, colonialism, white privilege, and white supremacy in every facet of its life and in society at large. And it also updates the definition of racism now in the Constitution, so that was very positive. And then another adds to paragraph 4 of Article 6 the words about gender and ability, inclusiveness of the church. The United Methodist Church is a part of the Church Universal, which is one body in Christ. The United Methodist Church acknowledges that all persons are of sacred worth, all persons without regard to race, gender, ability, color, national origin, status, or economic condition. And again, we need 2/3 of annual conferences around the world to ratify those for them to be successfully added to the Constitution. Next big issue was worldwide reorganization. And this also requires amendments to the Constitution to make this possible. And this refers to, it would make the U.S. into another central conference. So that would turn us into the 8th central conference with the other 7, so that we're on equal footing with them. At present, think of our conference like a mothership that hovers over the other 7. This would put us on equal footing. It's kind of a colonialistic structure in that model that would remove that structure. And then what's significant is it would allow us to make easier changes to our book of discipline, and other central conferences wouldn't be able to vote on particular sections of ours, like we can't vote on theirs in particular sections. So that's a key thing that happened. We'll need about a year for those votes to go through the annual conferences. Another big moment, deacons can now equally preside at both communion and baptism with elders. Before they could assist, but they could not equally preside. There were certain words they couldn't say, only elders could. So this puts elders and deacons in the sacraments on equal footing with one another and is more inclusive. It's wonderful. There's been decades of work going into that. And then we have the passage of the revised social principles. We already referred to that earlier, but there's more things that were added to the social principles. So this again, the social principles state our position as a denomination on a range of social issues like fair economics, issues of environmentalism, human sexuality, and many other social issues. And it's been about 12 years in the making of seeking to update the social principles. It involved thousands of United Methodists around the world. This was really a large effort. So here's just 2 key highlights of other things that were added. One is this language. Because all people are of sacred worth and certain basic human rights are due to everyone, we are committed to supporting the equal rights, liberties, and protections of all people, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's great. And then another section on basic rights and freedoms includes, basic rights and freedoms include the right to life, liberty, and security, as well as to equal treatment before the law and freedom from unlawful detention. Additional liberties include the rights to fair trial, privacy, public assembly, free expression, democracy, food, and shelter. Further, workers have rights to engage in collective bargaining, receive just compensation, and work in safe, healthy environments. Here's an example of faith in politics. We're making a statement to our country of important policies that should be followed. And then we turn to the budget. The budget of our denomination compared to 2016, the last full general conference we had, it has been cut between 39 to 41%. There's some variables that can shift in the equation. That's why there's a small range to that. So what are the factors that led to this cut? Really 2 big ones we could say is that 25% of congregations left our denomination. That was necessary. These were congregations more on the conservative end who weren't in agreement with the coming changes that just happened. And some went to the GMC, a lot didn't, a lot went independent. And that changed the voting at General Conference by a significant margin that in some ways helped what we just discussed to happen. So they left. That it affected the budget of the denomination and COVID and lower attendance that we've seen within our denomination because of that. What will this affect? The number of bishops assigned to each jurisdiction and annual conference. So annual conferences are found within a larger body called a jurisdiction. It has several of them in 5 different regions around the U.S. And so those jurisdictions have less bishops in some cases. That applies to us. This September, we're going to consolidate with Wisconsin's annual conference, and then the 2 will come together and we will share a bishop. It probably will be Bishop Dan Schwerin, although that hasn't officially been announced yet. We'll know that later in the summer. In Africa in particular, they were pushing for 5 more bishops because they've been growing. They're only going to receive 2 bishops additional bishops because of the budget issues. The 6 major agencies we have, like Church and Society, the General Board of Higher Education Foundation, United Methodist Higher Education Foundation, some others, their budgets will be cut significantly, and the clergy pension system is gone, and it will be replaced by a 401k system similar to what many companies use, but that will save the denomination money. Those are the big things. Just a few small things, and I'll turn it over to Pastor Bob. We now have voted as a denomination that we wish to be in full communion with the Episcopal Church. It may take a few years for them to vote on this, but we expect that to go through. We are currently in full communion with the ELCA, or the Lutherans, and that specific branch of their denomination. So that would mean that we can equally preside at communion together and we can exchange clergy. The church apologized for its role in Hawaiian history, specifically the support of the 1893 overthrow of Hawaiian monarchy and it also apologized for instances of clergy sexual abuse in its past as an official statement. Reverend Scort Christie of the NIC, that's our annual conference, he spoke out about the persecution of Christians in India by the nationalistic Hindu government. And for several years now, Christians living in India have been facing hundreds of acts of discrimination and persecution each year, as well as in other countries. So attention was called to that issue, and then a call for us to reach out to our respective representatives in Congress to ask them to take action. And then disaffiliations are done. Remember those 25% of churches that left? The pathway for them to leave has now been closed, which was needed. And then now a reaffiliation pathway has been created if churches wish to return and come back. And then finally, there will be a special session of General Conference in 2026. Because we have such a backlog of work, we won't wait a full 4 years till 2028. We'll come back sooner. So thanks for bearing with me as I went through all of that. I'll turn it over to Pastor Bob.
Thanks, Scott. I think that's a nice summary of some of the things that have happened during this conference. I want to go back and give you just a little history. In 1968, the United Methodist Church was formed as two denominations kind of came together. The EUB, which was the Evangelical United Brethren Church, and the Methodist Church here in the United States. They came together and formed the United Methodist Church. Since that time, there has been a considerable group of people who have become more and more conservative on the southern part of our country, and more and more liberal on the western side of our country, and other parts of our denomination in the United States have been pretty mixed. But I've been working since, for about 35 years now on full inclusion of people of all types, not just LGBTQ folks, but having some racial equality within the church. A lot of our churches are very segregated places where we don't see a lot of people of color. And so for a number of years, I was on what's called the Methodist Federation for Social Action. It's called MFSA, and I was on the national board there, and have been working for throughout this whole time to create reconciling congregations, which we are. And my last congregation at New Hope became reconciling as well. It's this whole idea that people are included in our church, that Jesus is open and wants people to become part of this group that is seeking to find a better relationship with God. So I've been working on that for a long time, and during the time of my ordination, which was about 30 years ago, my mentor during that process was a man named Reverend Greg Dell. Greg was a fantastic pastor. He was the pastor at Broadway Church in Chicago. He was also fiercely dedicated to full inclusion of LGBT folks. And he was one of the first clergy persons here in Northern Illinois to marry a same-sex couple. And because he did that, he was charged with heresy and charged with several items in our discipline at that time that said that he violated the discipline, and was brought into a huge church trial. And a church trial, you may not know how that kind of works, but it's a messy thing. Elders, Scott and I are elders. We're called. People are called to serve on a jury, essentially, and another elder is called to be the defense attorney kind of person for the person who's accused, and they have a large group, and it's presided on. This whole kind of church trial is presided on by a bishop. Well, Greg was brought to actually the trial happened in Wisconsin, and He was accused of kind of violations of the discipline and was shown to be guilty of that. And so for a year, his ministry was suspended. He was unable to serve as a pastor for a year after that trial. It didn't stop him from his work. And he continued to work with people like me to try to encourage us and to learn about how we can be more fully inclusive of others. He wrote and he had seminars that he put on, and through all that time, people were being hurt. And I don't mean just, kind of feeling bad. I mean, people were being killed. Gay and lesbian folks suffered during this process, partly because the church was not standing behind them. They weren't supportive. They weren't available to them to be a place to go and know that they were safe. And what we have done now, finally, 30 years later, is to say to all our friends and all those who are out there who are struggling, that God loves them, and that we're supportive of them, and that they have friends, and that they won't be abandoned. I will not leave you orphaned, Jesus says. And now we are finally following through on that as a denomination, and thank God for that. There are a couple other things that I want to just mention in terms of kind of the legislation. Our work isn't over, partly because we've changed some words, but we still have to change people's actions and people's minds. And just because you've got something that sounds nice to read doesn't mean that people are going to think differently. So partly we just need to show love and figure out ways to help people who are still not sure that they want to welcome others, to show them that that's a good thing, not only for the people that they're welcoming, but for them. So we want to do those things. We also need to recognize that the work isn't done even in terms of our legislation. Scott said that some of our other annual conference or general conferences, they're central conferences, thank you. Central conferences around the world are a little more conservative. That's really true in Africa. And Africa is growing faster than any other place in the United Methodist Church. What that means is that 2 years from now and 4 years from now, they're going to have more delegates to the conference. And so we need to keep working to make sure that the votes don't get overturned, that all these things that we've done that are very positive and helpful and kind of move our church in the way that we want to see it go aren't changed. And so that just means that there's more work to do and more minds to change and more love to show.
And could you mention the reorganization? That if that goes through, how that'll affect that?
Well, sure. So there's actually two problems with the reorganization.
Right.
One is that each one of these central conferences is going to have to vote by a 2/3 vote to approve these changes because they're part of the constitution of the church. And chances are that they won't. Chances are that some of them won't. And what that means is that we're going to be stuck with the same kind of structure that we've got now, which just makes it difficult to make changes and to do things on a kind of a local level. If these reorganizations occur, we'll be able to make changes to the discipline, the rules that we have to follow, that are vital for the United States. if it doesn't go through, then that's gonna be much more difficult. And we'll have to be really focused on other parts of the world and trying to figure out how we can work with them to kind of encourage the kind of policies that we want. I think there's another piece of this which just is, it's a difficult thing to talk about, but one of the reasons that the conservative element in the church has been so successful in the past at getting delegates to vote in their way is that they paid them, and that there has been money that transferred from some of these organizations to these delegates in Africa, particularly, which pay for votes. And some of that is going to go away because we don't have as much money in the denomination. We don't have as much emphasis on trying to do that anymore because a lot of those groups have gone. And so the folks who are in Africa who are used to feeling financial support are going to feel a little abandoned, I think, by the church. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't some backlash to that as well. This is just all to say that there's more to do, and we'll need to keep vigilant. Thanks.
Lisa?
Hi there. So I just wanted to, as one of the co-chairs with Kate of our All Means All, our local group, just kind of share a little bit of what came from RMN and our experience. So we have been, as a church, members of Reconciling Ministries Network now for 12 years since we've been reconciling. And so we pay our membership fees every year, and we've just done that for this year. So ongoing, we are members of RMN. Some of us individually are also members as individuals for that amount of time or longer. So they've been involved in helping us figure out what we're doing in terms of this whole process. But I liked one of the, just a brief piece from their recent email, which kind of was their response to the General Conference changes. And partly I appreciated, Scott, when you talked in the service about all the people who have already left or who have died and not been able to experience this, which I feel is really powerful.
Yes.
Just, this is a lot of years and a lot of people who have been fighting this and lamenting. So this is their words. So in the coming days and weeks, perhaps already, you may experience a mix of joy with grief for those who have passed away before this momentous occasion, or those who could not stay in a hurtful church. There's no one right way to feel, but we hope that what you experience most of all is the all-covering love of God. And then, so there are a lot of changes, but then they also add, with LGBTQ plus folks considering whether it's time to come back home to the United Methodist Church, it's more important than ever to make sure that we recommit to building the reconciling movement. One heart, one pew, one congregation at a time, like we've always done.
Beautiful. So important. Thank you, Lisa. Kate?
I just want to give a big thank you to Katie and Lisa and Ed and Bob and our previous pastors who led the charge to become reconciling 12 years ago, long before we saw this light at the end of the tunnel. This is who we've always been and who we will continue to be. And then one other thing that I don't think anybody talked about was there was a resolution to calling on the United Methodist institutions, including WestPac, which is our pension and investment agency, to not invest in government bonds of Israel, Turkey, and Morocco due to their long-term military occupations. So our All Means All team continues to meet and do work to promote inclusivity, and we welcome anyone who would like to join us. Reach out to Lisa. I would love to have your help.
Yes. Thank you, panelists. I'm going to shut the recording off now, but don't go anywhere. If you have any questions